Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Gibson. I'm your Central South Regional Representative, and I'm here to introduce a rather important panel. I have two members coming up. Excellent. Much like many areas of life, in law we have a pervasive problem with sexual harassment, discrimination, and even sexual assault. For years, women faced discrimination and couldn't even go to law school. We can go to law school and we can enter the practice now, but ask yourself, what has really changed? Most women here, most women everywhere, likely have multiple stories that they could tell you about them being sexually harassed, assaulted, and discriminated against. Oftentimes, this is at the hands of other, predominantly male lawyers. Unfortunately, this is so ingrained in our culture that many of these instances go unnoticed because people don't accept that the behavior is abnormal. I could stand here and share my experiences with you for hours, but we're going to wait for the hospitality suite because I've heard I'm more entertaining after a drink or two. Today we are lucky to have a panel of women who are leading the charge to bring about change. All three of these women left large firms to go out on their own. Today, I want you to ask yourselves, why? Personally, I'm super excited to meet my Twitter friend, Erin Durant, in person for the first time. I can't personally call it ex for so many reasons, but also calling Erin my ex-friend seems a little bit harsh. Erin founded her own firm after practicing as a partner at one of Canada's largest litigation firms, and she's litigated at all levels of court in our country. She has received many awards, and I recommend that you follow her on the app formerly known as Twitter. With Erin, we have Faye Faraday, a social justice lawyer, and also the founder of her own firm. Faye represents a wide range of litigants in her quest to end discrimination for all. Faye is also a policy consultant who works collaboratively with community organizations to bring about change. Rounding out the panel is Alexi Wood, who is a founding partner at St. Lawrence Barristers. We don't have a bio for Alexi, so I had to look her up. She is a commercial litigator, practices in administrative law, deals with regulatory disputes, and has a passion for social justice. She's also committed to her large pro bono practice. Throughout the panel today, we welcome questions. Sam, I'm going to ask you that throughout to give the microphone to people who have a question. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to our panel.
Okay. Thanks very much, everyone, and thank you, Ian, for putting this panel together and inviting us to be here. We're going to do something a little bit different. We're not going to do separate presentations. We're going to have a bit of a roundtable conversation. I'm sorry we don't have comfy chairs and a little fire to sit around, but imagine us in that context. I'm here in my role as lead counsel for the Discrimination and Harassment Council for the Law Society of Ontario. And what we do in that context, we provide an information service for anyone who has experienced discrimination or harassment, specifically by lawyers or paralegals in Ontario. It's a place where people can come talk about what's happened to them, find out what their options are, sort of navigate the really complicated terrain of how to enforce rights to equality. And we also provide some coaching to folks who are respondents in those situations, and also conciliation and mediation. And one of the things that we do as a confidential service, we ensure that there is that space to have those very honest, candid, confidential conversations about what's really happening in the practice of law. And every 6 months, we release anonymized statistics that show the trends of what's happening. We know it's just the tip of the iceberg, right? But it does give us some insight into the behavior that is unfortunately tremendously common. The Discrimination and Harassment Council program was started in 1999. It followed on the heels of the Touchstone Report in 1993-94, which is having its 30th anniversary this year. That report identified how women were leaving the profession in massive, disproportionate rates, a third of women leaving the profession within the first 3 years of practice, because it was such a hostile environment, such a toxic environment for women to work in. Those concerns haven't changed, right? There is still a massive erosion of the number of women in the practice, and particularly a real erosion of the number of racialized lawyers in the practice. I started at a time when I was one of 2 racialized people in my class in law school, the first racialized person in my firm, the only in many, many spaces then and now. And what we see with the statistics that the DHC reports every 6 months is that sexual harassment and racial harassment are consistently the top 2 concerns that are raised with us. And that led the Toronto Star to do a 2-year-long investigation into experiences of specifically sexual assault within the legal profession. And it was the publication of that report, that investigative piece, that led to us having this panel today. What we decided when the 3 of us were preparing, we decided we're not going to talk about our own stories. Every single woman in law has a story that she can tell you about discrimination and harassment that she's faced. Many of us can tell you stories about sexual assault that we've experienced within the profession. You know, if you need to hear our personal stories to believe that this is real, you're a few decades behind the ball. So we're not going to do that. But I am going to tell you the kind of things that we see in the Discrimination and Harassment Council office. You know, these patterns are so common that if I tell you about them, there's no risk of disclosing anything that's confidential, because they are so common. Things like articling students being sexually harassed, sexually assaulted by senior partners, right? People who are known to have a history of preying on articling students and young associates. You know, being subject to sexual harassment and sexual assault by clients, going to client development events and routinely being propositioned or subject to sexualized language and innuendo and harassment. All of the different variations of really serious physical and verbal sexual interference are common. We hear about them every week. But I think the pattern that I found most shocking when I joined the DHC is the number of people who call, whether they are women in the profession or clients, who are told that if they're working in the profession, you must have sex with the partner in order to get access to files. If you want to work with this client, right, you got to deliver sexual services first. Or clients who are told, you can pay with sex instead of money. You can pay your bill with sex, right? We get those calls regularly. And so if we think as a profession, right, it's our fundamental obligation, it's an ethical obligation in the rules of professional conduct that we uphold. We have a special responsibility to uphold the human rights of people in the province. We have explicit obligations to conduct our services in a way that are free of discrimination and harassment, and our employment in ways that are free of discrimination and harassment. There is no doubt that as a profession, we have turned our eyes away from what's actually happening. And when so that's the only sort of formal presentation bit that we're going to do on the panel. But I wanted to give you a context for why this panel is happening now, and why it's so important for us to have this conversation. It was interesting when the Toronto Star article came out, a lot of the response that I got from people was, well, I don't know why the Toronto Star is doing that. Everyone's known this for years. Which is, like, from the profession, a really sad response, I gotta say. But that was probably the response I saw most frequently.
They needed an investigative journalist to do that?
Exactly, that was direct quote, right? But what really stood out in the 2 years that the Toronto Star was doing the investigation, and while I was speaking with them, and in the work that we do at the DHC, is that every single woman who comes forward to talk to us, even in a confidential setting, is terrified. The fear factor of coming forward among a community of women who are, relatively speaking, in the economy and in society, tremendously privileged is shocking. And so I just want to toss out the question to Alexi and Aaron. Talk to me about this fear. Where does this come from? Why are we all living in this really deep culture of fear? Who wants to take that on?
I'll go first.
Yeah.
And I apologize in advance. I lost my filter about 2 years ago, so I may cross some lines here. But the fear factor is interesting to me. When I first read the Toronto Star piece, it had quotes in it from women lawyers who maybe you've heard of, like Marie Hennon and Martha McCarthy. And I consider them, among women lawyers, to be at the absolute peak of their profession, their practice areas. And to hear them or read that they say in the Star that, it happens to them on a regular basis in terms of facing discrimination, harassing comments, inappropriate touching, whatever you want to call it, and that those two women are afraid to talk about it and to call it out, that really struck me, because I didn't think Marie Hennon was afraid of anything. I'm afraid of her, very much so. I think the fear comes from a long-standing view and fact that women are minorities in the profession, and not just in numbers. We're particularly rare in positions of power within legal workplaces. I was very happy, actually, as I was looking around the room and seeing people stand up, that so many women now are leading local law associations. So I think women are taking some of the power back. But really, the fear comes from a few things. One, and this is general for women who go through this. One is people won't believe you, or people think you're being overly sensitive about something that happens. And all women have that. When an inappropriate sexual remark is made, you get tapped on the butt at a cocktail party. People just are afraid of being brave enough to tell their story and then to not be believed or to be pushed aside. Another fear factor that I think exists is, and this is what I've heard from some people who I've spoken with, is there's this fear that if they report it to the Law Society or firm management, that the outcome of that report will not be a very serious sanction or event for the individual who did the inappropriate behavior, and there's a fear that there will be negative career consequences to the woman or other minority who's experiencing discrimination. They'll have negative career repercussions as a result. And the reason for that is, if it's an older male who's acted inappropriately, you're not really just complaining about that person, that person has a likely pretty large network, and there's a concern that your referrals will go down and you'll basically be pushed aside. So those are some of the fear factors that I've witnessed, and Alexi, I'm sure you have more.
And I think those are two of the really big fear factors, and it's that second one of the power structure that exists. So from day one, as lawyers, we article. So, you go through articling, and there's that sort of competitive get ahead, you want to article so that first you compete just to get your articling gig. Then there's the competition when you're in articling to get hired back. Then you go through, the structure through the law firm to get advancement in whatever that looks like in your firm. So we're in a profession that is already structured to make us worry about every single little thing because that's how we have to get ahead. And so it's one of the things it's that fear factor piece of always wanting to get ahead. If I do anything out of place, then how is that going to affect me? Is that going to pull me back when I've been working so hard to get through law school, to get through articling, to get through these first years as an associate? If I do this, is this going to pull me back? And that of course spans not just the gendered issues, but we're here today to talk about the gendered issues. And this is part of the really insidious nature of what happens in this topic. And as again, I said, there can be lots of different areas where this is applicable, but for this gendered topic, Faye talked about some really horrible, egregious, awful things. And I'm sure everyone sitting in this room would think that's horrible and awful. But one of the things I really also want to talk about are some of the little things that might not seem horrible and awful to some people in this room, but they add up. And so it's the constant little things. It's the slightly inappropriate, maybe kind of off-putting, making you uncomfortable comment that you get when you go to a cocktail reception about your dress or how that looks on you. And so maybe next time you think, I really don't want to go to that cocktail reception. I'm just awkward and uncomfortable and I don't want to go. So you don't go. So you don't meet that client. So you don't sit next to that partner. So that partner doesn't staff you on that next file. And it's that little step by step by step. And then you turn around one day and it's like, oh, right, they're buddies with that partner and now they've got that big client and I don't. And it's that culture of fear, because this is how our profession is structured. It's that culture of fear. And so it isn't just a women problem. It isn't just women need to get stronger and learn to speak out and do various things like that. It's thinking about how this affects the profession broadly speaking and how we all play a part in it. Everyone has a part to play in this. And so some of the things from senior people, if you have more clout in a firm, for example, is if you're in a courtroom, and this is an actual concrete example, a judge who calls on certain people in the courtroom, the older men in the courtroom were called on, a younger woman went to stand up and the judge said, I didn't call on you, you sit down. And all the other people had been standing up and speaking, and the judge hadn't called them out for it, but when that younger woman did, the judge called her out and she had to sit down, she couldn't talk. Obviously, it's going to be very hard in that courtroom for someone to stand up and say, Your Honor, let her speak. But even just going up to her afterwards and saying, hey, you know what, I saw what he did and that wasn't cool. Just that little bit of understanding that what happened isn't cool can go so far to helping to rebuild that confidence and to help break down some of that fear, that it's not, you're not internalizing it and then just having that snowball effect of step by step, just shrinking back from the profession.
One of the things that I think is really important to emphasize is that the impact of this discrimination is felt very profoundly on an intersectional level. I'm Filipino. When I entered the profession, there were, I think, maybe 3 other Filipino lawyers in the province. And so, when someone my age is talking about firsts, it's kind of sad. But so I know what it's like to go through the profession as a racialized woman and be excluded because of that. But it's important to emphasize that all of the things that happen on the basis of race are, on the basis of gender, are so much worse for Black, Indigenous, and racialized women, and they are the majority of the people who we see at the DHC. So we've got the fear factor. We need to overcome the issue of fear, and how do we do that? I mean, I know how I did it. I just unlike Erin, I never had a filter, so I've just always said what I thought and done what I thought. And when I'd had enough, got up and left and started my own firm. But it's not always that easy, right? So I think when we were talking before, one of you talked about how you have to go through different phases, how these are daily experiences, they accumulate. It's not like one bad thing, it's like a daily, it's like that sandpaper that's rubbing on you every single day, and at a certain point you realize your skin is in shreds and you can't do it anymore. But Alexi, I think it was you who was talking about the different phases we need to go through. So do you want to, how do you get unstuck? Like, what's it like being stuck?
Yeah, so the example that I had used was the water wearing down a rock, just that water on a rock. And as Faye said, it's just that gradual step. And, one of the things we talked about when we were planning for this panel is we all started our own firms, and I don't think that's a surprise. One of the things that's fabulous about the profession at the moment is it is easier and easier now to have small firms and to start your own firms, and the three of us have all done that. And we are seeing a real explosion of smaller women-run firms. And I don't think that is a surprise or shock. It's no shock to me that so many of these firms that are starting are run by women. And for so many of us, there just comes that point where the choice historically, I think, for a lot of women was, I'm tapping out, I'm leaving the profession. And fortunately now there is this other option, which is to go and create our own firms. But I think so many of us have just woken up one day and realized that it was really untenable for whatever reason. Sometimes there's a big break and sometimes it's a slow burn. But whether it's getting passed over for partnership yet one more time, whether it's just seeing younger women in the profession go through the same thing you went through and being demoralized over that and thinking, okay, I really thought we were past this, and clearly we're not. Whatever that is that breaking point. But then how do we deal with it? And that's what Faye's question about breaking down that culture of fear. And it's one of the things I will say this, I was quoted in the Star article. I didn't know who else was going to be quoted in the Star article. And when the journalists called me and read me my quotes, I had a panic. I called my friends and I thought, I'm gonna tank my firm. I am going to tank my firm if I say this. If I say in the Toronto Star, law hasn't had a Me Too time and it's time for it, I am going to tank my firm because 95% of my client base is referral from other lawyers, and other lawyers are going to think I am this, strident militant feminist. Yeah, probably, but and they're going to think this, and this is going to destroy my firm's reputation. And I had to be talked down from that ledge by some of my friends. And then the Star article came out, and I breathed a huge sigh of relief when the first name I saw was Martha McCarthy. I thought, okay, I'm okay. Martha's out there too. But that is ridiculous. I have founded my own firm. I am, as Faye said, by all accounts, on every sort of objective metric, a successful person running my own firm. And I was still terrified that I was going to tank my firm because I said law needs a Me Too time. I think about that now. Well, really, like that fear, but it is so pervasive. And so, getting back to Faye's question of what can we do about it, I do think that it is something that speaking out, having these panels, normalizing the discussion, and trying to, again, bring the attention to, as I said, that water on a rock, that, small individual step. I think we have come a really long way. I think that, 30, 40 years ago, it would have been a discussion up here of, okay, it's not okay to sexually harass and, force sex on your associates and your clients. And that would have been the big discussion. Now, I think sitting here, everyone in this room would say, yes, we know that that is not appropriate and we've moved past that. But now we're still at that stage of that small incremental micro step that still just pushes people to the fringes of the profession. And talking about it, addressing it, people who see this behavior, as I said, you don't have to stand up in court and call the judge out for it, but you can talk to that person later. You can say things like that. And one thing for me that's always really helpful is having that sort of concrete example of what can I do? And not being paralyzed by the idea that, well, I can't fix gender in the profession. I can't fix gender in my firm. No, you can't. You might not be able to fix it all, but that doesn't mean throw your hands up and do nothing. It does mean take little steps, call out behavior where you can if you see it, talk to people when you see it, just support them. Those little steps go so far, and it's just that ripple effect. It's not going to happen overnight, but maybe I'm just ridiculously optimistic, but I do see avenues and potential for change.
And I agree with Alexi on a lot of that, in particular about my level of optimism in terms of things getting incrementally better. I think I'm the youngest person on the panel. My generation and younger, we're all a little bit of, uncontrollable troublemakers. Me probably more than most, but we aren't as afraid of some of the stuff that older lawyers are. And I don't know why that is, but that's sort of how a lot of us are. And what I've noticed over the years on my various adventures into causes that I care about, and I have too many, and it's a story for another day, but my approach to things has been to speak about things and call it out on occasion. Sometimes I'll tiptoe into it, put out one comment, see if I've been canceled. If I haven't been canceled, go a little further, talk to the Toronto Star on occasion. But, what I would say to people who are afraid of calling it out, either at the firm, publicly, in the media, whatever you want to do, is every time I've spoken about an issue I was afraid to speak about and afraid to call out, that was an issue that a lot of people were quietly experiencing. I've received nothing but incredible support. And I think that the fear factor of, okay, if I call out this behavior or make a complaint about this person or this conduct, I think the fear about, okay, my practice is going to implode, I'm not going to have any work, has been significantly reduced by the growing number of women-owned firms who support each other. So if Alexi would have got some blowback for her comment in the Star and was short on work, I could probably name 10 firms founded by female lawyers who have similar beliefs as Alexi, who would just be sending her all of our work, to keep her going. So I think that the trend of women deciding to start their own businesses and their own firms, large or small, even freelancers, is keeping more women around that I think would have opted out of the profession. Well, I shouldn't say opted out, pushed out of the profession. And it's giving us a more collective power as a group of smaller firms to sort of rally together, support each other, and be seen as safe spaces for young lawyers to come to if they have an issue. I hear from a lot of young lawyers and not so young lawyers regularly due to my advocacy about mental health in the legal profession. So I hear from a lot of women lawyers who are going through not good things at their firms. And, you know, sometimes they just need somebody to talk to that they can trust. You know, I hear from a woman lawyer who's at a small firm, you know, only 3 lawyers, she's the only woman, and one of her colleagues is constantly hitting on her. She's married, she does not want the attention. She's told them, and, you know, and it's really impacting not just her ability to work, but her mental health is impacted because you feel like, okay, I'm in a small community, there's limited employment options. If I call this out or quit or tell the law society or do anything, you know, my career in this town is over. So am I ready to move my life to get away from this harassment? And like, you can just imagine the emotional turmoil that puts people through. But, you know, a lot of times just having a safe person to talk to about these issues helps. And that's why I'm happy that your office exists. But, you know, a good way that anybody in this room can help is, you know, by telegraphing that you're a safe person to trust with these issues. You know, if you're in a firm of a handful of lawyers and you witness another lawyer doing something inappropriate, and especially if you're a male lawyer who identifies a colleague doing something inappropriate, it means the world to young women associates for you as the more senior male lawyer to be the one to call it out and deal with it. You know, it's very difficult when an event happens in a large room, many people see, and nothing happens. And I'll tell you a story about that. So there was, not my old firm, but a firm somewhere in this province had a Christmas party. At the Christmas party, one of the male associates grabbed a legal assistant by the face and pulled her up and kissed her. And it was his assistant. On another occasion, at another function, the same lawyer grabbed an articling student who was walking by the hips and placed her on his lap. The first event that happened, the assistant wasn't comfortable reporting it. You know, it was a Christmas party, there was drinking, you know, it was her direct report, you know, so she decided at the time to not do anything. Nobody that witnessed the event did anything, even though everyone talked about it. The articling student event ended up differently. So it was witnessed by people, because it was at an event, at a table with people, and one more senior woman at the table decided to report it, and you know, to the firm managing partner and say, look, like, this can't happen. This is now the second time I know of that this has happened involving the same lawyer. We need to do something about it. And what they ultimately ended up doing about it wasn't great, but the women involved in both of those incidents felt very supported by that one lawyer who took the ball into her hands and said, look, we're not doing this at this firm anymore. Like, this is not appropriate. It's against the law. It's sexual harassment. It's all kinds of inappropriate, and it's just not going to happen. And, you know, just having the guts to do that when it's a friend of yours or one of your law firm partners who's acting inappropriately will mean the world to the young women in your firm. And the inverse is also true. So when I put out my book a couple of years ago, I dedicated a whole chapter on sort of women in the law and how that impacted my own mental health. And, you know, if you're seeing things happen again and again, even if it's not happening to you, but if you're witnessing a woman or a racialized person within the firm who's being mistreated, and, you know, you're watching what the firm's doing about it, and if the answer is nothing, it impacts all the women in the firm, not just the one who was initially harassed or mistreated in any way. And it's that sort of persistent grinding on women in law, where, there's constant things happening that are inappropriate and no actions being taken, that leads one to just give up faith in one's firm or workplace and move on. And, I think, as Alexi had pointed out, in the past, a lot of people were moving on to just quit this profession entirely, which is such a shame. That the time and the money invested in a legal education is huge. Women perform very well in law school and, in my view, are very good lawyers. And to be pushing people out because of this is nonsense in this day and age. So, the fact that there now are other avenues, such as starting your own firm, in-house departments, universities, colleges who have proper human resources departments and will actually investigate things. These are all places that women are gravitating towards, and that you see in the Law Society annual snapshot reports. Like, that's where we're going now. And, I think that there is a benefit to speaking, there is a benefit of calling it out, and there's a huge danger in not doing that, especially with this generation of lawyers who are outspoken, because I know it's going to happen. There's going to be some lawyer, probably 5 years younger than me or so, something's going to happen, and she's going to blow the lid off the whole thing. I'm not going to be the one to
Folks. The fact that we're still having a conversation about if you see something, say something, is like, after 30 years of active discussion on the topic, we shouldn't have to have those conversations, right? I think one of the things that you've touched on, Erin, is the impact that all of this has on women and on racialized folks in the profession. It's the burden that discrimination has on people. It literally makes you sick. It literally shortens your life to be constantly subject to the stress of code switching, of not being your authentic self because who you are isn't considered legitimate, right? To be subjected to overt and silent discrimination, to be subject to the gaslighting that comes from, it's not because of a woman that you didn't get that file, even though you know it is, right? Or that referral, or et cetera, et cetera. It all takes a very serious toll. And before someone can move from that situation of being stuck, right, where they're internalizing that judgment that you're the one who's flawed, you're the one who's not tough enough to be in it, there has to be a period of self-care and healing to say, you know what, it's not me, it's that I'm dealing with that's messed up. And that's the point at which, those of us who have broken free just say, you know what, it's not my job to fix your toxic environment, right? I'm done with that. I've lived in it, I'm not cleaning up after you. So I'm just going to go start somewhere on the principles that really reflect my values in the world and how I think people should be treated in the world. And that's really easy to do, right? It feels really good. And you think, oh, where did all that energy come from? I didn't used to have this energy. I have throughout my career for the last 30 years intentionally sent my referrals to younger racialized lawyers because no one was there to do that for me. There was no one ahead of me to do that for me. And I recognized that it's my duty to be doing that, to creating those pathways. So there's, we've talked about things that we can do at an individual level, right? But this is a really deep systemic problem. And you can't solve systemic problems one individual at a time. We can't all go off and start our own firms. I mean, we could, but with that, how long would it take to change the profession? I do think it's really true that there is going to be a tsunami in the next few years, right? Within the next 3 to 5 years, Gen Z and the millennials will be the majority of the population in the legal profession. And legacy firms that are just starting in a very light way to touch on issues of EDI, which are very light touch programs, right, are going to be swept away because the values of Gen Z are miles ahead of where the legal profession is. And they'll vote with their feet. They'll start their own firms. They will not stick around. We're already seeing in large firms that there's a lot of movement in the first couple of years where people are like, this isn't what I signed up for. These are not my values. But I think that at the same time that there is that generational value shift and the expectations of what the profession should look like, we're also dealing with a generation that has extreme debt, is bearing the brunt of the affordability crisis, is bearing the brunt of the high cost of law school. So those two things are pulling in tension with each other, which is why when I'm teaching law students, I see the level of social anxiety and fear that people have, and I think the likelihood is that people will leave the profession more than change it. And so I think it's important for us to talk about systemic things that we as a profession must do to make the change that will bring us into compliance with the fundamental law, right? I think we forget that this isn't a culture war. This is about failure to comply with the proactive legal obligations that we have and the fundamental professional ethical obligations that we have. And we haven't treated it as that kind of a problem, right? Yeah. We've talked about this as a woman problem. Mm-hmm. And, as long as we keep talking about it as a woman problem, it's going to persist. This is really, sorry guys, this is a man problem, right? It's virtually every respondent in every complaint that I have heard about harassment has been a man, and that's consistent with the social profile outside of law. There's no reason to expect that law is any different. Law is a profession that is built on male norms, on white male norms and white male power, and it is that power imbalance that facilitates the abuse that we see. And so we need, guys, we need you to call each other out. We need you to hold your male peers accountable, to not turn away when you see it. And oh, have I felt the temperature drop in the room? The silence and the, oh my God, this is uncomfortable. But you know what? It's way more uncomfortable living on the sharp end of it, right? And that sort of discomfort and shame and embarrassment that you may feel, you'll get over it, right? it's once we start actually talking about what the problem is, you won't have to carry around that anymore, right? It's like being able to stand up strongly on the right side and say, we're going to change the way we work. We're not going to let those dirty secrets fester. We don't care if you're a rainmaker. You're costing us so much more in the churn of associates and legal staff and the reputational damage and the payouts that we have to make, right, than your rainmaking, right? Because you're making rain, but you're also making trouble. So there's, and in terms of, we have to have those conversations, and that includes calling stuff out in court. The idea that you can't call out something horrifically sexist in court, yes, you can. I do it on the regular. And it's important to do that because it's not just you as the female lawyer who is being disrespected. It is your client, right? And if you can't stand up for your client, what are you doing as an advocate? It's if you're being disrespected, your client is being disrespected. So, yeah, the fear factor needs to be dropped. We are, as women, we are conditioned to be really polite and deferential and make things, smooth things over. Done with that. Spent 30 years doing that, right? It hasn't got us where we need to go. So we need to have those honest conversations. And so I guess from my side of the generational arc, I'm impatient, right? I've been doing this way too long, and it's like not, right? So we need to start, we have to shift away from thinking about this as individual aberrant circumstances, but this is actually the foundational power dynamic within the profession, and unless we address it as at a systemic issue, we're going to be having this exact same conversation 30 years from now. So, yeah, over to you.
I think that's like really, really important, and I just want to, for the men in the room that have been called out, also to take it a step back again and just come back to the comments I was making before about, there may be some behavior that everyone knows is unacceptable, and the concern that might exist about, well, I'm not seeing anything overt like that, so therefore there's nothing for me to call out. And you're just going back to the comments that I made before about the comments that might seem innocuous about how someone looks in that dress at the cocktail party, the comments that might seem innocuous about, well, why do we need gender-neutral robing rooms? It's been like this forever and it's perfectly fine. And now I'm uncomfortable in a gender-neutral robing room because I have to deal with the fact that I'm now in a gender-neutral robing room. Think about, and again, I face it, we weren't going to tell sort of personal war stories, but the gender-neutral robing room, and think about the impact on people who are not the typical power structure. So for example, when I was a younger lawyer, and I would usually be the only woman on a file, I would go into my robing room and I would change and I would hang out in the hall and I would wait. And I would come out and the senior male partner on the file would be like, oh, it was so great, I just ran into so-and-so, we're having lunch next week. Cool, thanks. I was standing in the hall. So it's those things where you're just getting that reinforced message. And so why is a gender-neutral robing room a good idea? Because one of the very first times post-pandemic, when I was able to go into the gender-neutral robing room at Osgoode Hall, I ran into male colleagues that I hadn't seen since the beginning of the pandemic, and I was making the lunch dates with those male colleagues. And I wouldn't have had that opportunity because Osgoode Hall is a big place, and I might not have been in the same courtroom as that person. So maybe I would have seen him, maybe I wouldn't. But I did because we were in the gender-neutral robing room. So those little things that may not seem like a big deal to some people actually really are. There's a case that I argued, and the name is Chu v. Soul Cleaning. And I call it out on purpose because this gets to the systemic issue. It was in front of Justice Shaw, and there was a racial component to the case. And at paragraph 69 through 71 of the decision, Justice Shaw calls out her own privilege and her own bias. And I have always given her such credit for doing that, because in these paragraphs, she just flat out says, I was unaware of this issue. I didn't appreciate how this issue, which to me seems perfectly normal and innocuous, really did matter to this racialized person. And she calls out the whole profession, and she says it is incumbent on us as a profession to understand our privilege and to understand that things that we in a privileged place may not see as a big deal really are. And so that's the kind of systemic change that we need to see happening.
And I just have a few more points before we wrap up. I want to talk about the Whisper Network. The women are all nodding, the men probably aren't. So I'm very happy that Ian invited us to make this panel, because often these discussions happen at Women in the Law events with only women in the room. And to be honest, I don't like those events anymore, because us talking to other women about things that other women already know aren't going to change anything. It really is, as has been said, it's a male problem. It's a male behavioral problem. And we need men and male allies to assist in calling out their brothers on this, and to modify their own behavior. Maybe in the past you've been a bit too touchy-feely, or, said sexist things to people. Like, just stop. You can turn a corner, it's not too late. But, the Whisper Network is out there, and the extent to which is out there is actually quite surprising. So, women of my vintage, we talk, and we all know who the sleazeballs are. We all know who has had an inappropriate sexual relationship with an associate. We all know the firms that allow this stuff to happen. And when I say we all know, people who have good and deep connections know. Unfortunately, new lawyers with no connections to the legal profession, racialized lawyers with no connection in the community, these people don't know, because they're not connected to the Whisper Network. The Whisper Network is getting quite sophisticated. I haven't seen it, but I have heard that young lawyers, probably first, second year calls, maybe third year calls, have worked together to create a list of male lawyers to avoid.
Really?
Yes. And do you want your name on that list? Do you want your firm's name on that list? Like, do you want 5 male lawyers from your firm on that list? Like, these lists exist, apparently. I would tell an associate a story about, something that occurred involving a lawyer, and I'm putting that guy on the list. So, the feeling that perhaps people are getting away with it, or firms are getting lucky because people haven't heard or don't know about a scandal that happened in the firm that you've tried to really, keep under wraps, like, that doesn't work. People know. Values.
Can I just pick up on that? The Whisper Network has always existed. And I want to emphasize that this is not about smearing men in the profession. This is actually a survival strategy, because these men are dangerous physically to us, right? This is about how not to get raped. This is about how not to get assaulted. It is not about this person's not a nice person, right? Or I don't like this person. It's about danger, beware, right?
Yeah, for sure. And she had mentioned something about values that I wanted to pick up on, and looping back to the generational comment again. My generation and younger care deeply about the values of a workplace. What the workplace stands for, what it's like to work there, what causes they care about. All of that stuff is deeply important to younger folks. And It's when values become misaligned where you end up with mental health challenges and people quitting en masse. And, it's important if you are trying to create positive values in your firm that you don't just create a diversity and inclusion page on your website with a whole bunch of nice sounding words about how great it is to be a woman in the firm and whatever. You can look at any big law website to look at what's usually written there. But if you're going to say to your people, we want this to be a good work environment for everyone, for women, we want it to be a safe place, you better do it. Otherwise, you're really antagonizing people who believe it. They're trying to find a spot in the profession. They're looking for jobs. They're reading all about, oh, wow, this firm really cares about treating women equally. And then you get in there and it's an abusive hellhole. That's really difficult. It's gaslighting to the people you're trying to attract and to work at your firm. And you really have to...
On that point, it's talent. If you want the best talent at your firm, they're going to be talking about that. They're going to be paying attention to that. Firms that have statements of principles on their websites, younger lawyers are looking for that now. So if you even want to just turn this around and make it your bottom line for your talent, the junior lawyers are paying attention to that, and they're going to look for that. And that is going to impact your bottom line and your ability to retain talent.
I just, as a closing comment, we've talked about a lot of heavy things, yeah. But this is what we deal with on the regular. And I think it's important for it to be out in the open. I think it's important for us to talk about it. But the way that you avoid these issues is really quite simple, right? It's you care for the people around you. When you are working with your colleagues, with your associates, with your staff, you check in with them. You make sure that you are connecting with them as individuals. You make sure that you are promoting your associates and your students equally, that you're nurturing their skill development equally, that you don't fall into patterns where you're just working with one person, right? Or you just assume that that's an easy person to get along with. The other person you may just need to work a little harder to get to know because they're different from you, right? But you need to develop your talent equally. And the more you focus on those skills of good relationship development, good skill development, and different forms of relationship building, client building, ways of engaging with each other and listening, especially listening, these problems are easy to spot at an early stage and to nip in the bud, right? But in the profession, I know we're all busy, right? It's like, how are you doing? Oh, so busy, right? And if you don't say, oh, I'm so busy, then people wonder. But we need to actually take the time to invest in building healthy relationships in the profession. And it's the failure to do that that allows the problems to explode in the way that they have. And so it's, I don't want you to think that this is all, impossible to get a handle on, right? It's actually just be a decent person all the time, right? It's not hard. We're happy to have questions. I know that we've
Any questions?
I'll be around most of the day and later this evening if anyone wants to talk as well. And I'm not sure, Alexia, are you going to be around?
So maybe
Yeah, so we'll be around if anyone wants to talk privately as well.
And you can find the contact information for the Discrimination and Harassment Council office on, like, just look up Discrimination and Harassment Council program, and I'll be happy to talk to you if you don't want to talk here.
Thank you. On behalf of our entire board, a deep felt thank you to all of you for providing this important conversation. To the men in the room, if you have felt uncomfortable, good.